The towering silhouette of a CH-53 Super Stallion helicopter dominated the bustling maintenance hangar at Sandstone Naval Air Station. Its massive rotors cast long shadows across the polished concrete floor, where ground crews moved with practiced efficiency, preparing the aircraft for routine training missions. Lieutenant Commander Morgan Hayes stood in the shadows of the far corner, her eyes fixed on the helicopter with a mixture of longing and regret. Once the Navy's most decorated female helicopter pilot, she now wore the plain uniform of a flight instructor, the wings on her chest a painful reminder of what she had lost, and what she could never have again. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The early morning sun streamed through the hangar's massive doors as Chief Petty Officer Donovan handed a wrench to Petty Officer First Class Rivera. "Did you hear about the new instructor they're bringing in?" he asked, wiping grease from his hands. Rivera rolled his eyes. "Another one? Didn't we just get that guy from Pensacola last month?" "Different this time," Donovan replied. "Some hotshot from the Pentagon. Helicopter specialist or something." He shrugged dismissively. "Probably another desk jockey who hasn't seen the inside of a real aircraft in years." The mechanics continued their work, occasionally joking about paper pushers and government officials who couldn't tell a tail rotor from a landing gear. Their laughter echoed through the cavernous hangar until the side door opened, allowing a shaft of bright sunlight to cut across the floor. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway. The person who entered wasn't what anyone expected. No pressed uniform with commander's stripes and gleaming insignia. No clipboard-wielding bureaucrat in a regulation-perfect appearance. Instead, a woman in her mid-30s wearing a simple flight instructor's uniform walked quietly into the hangar. She carried only a tablet and a small personal kit. Nothing about her commanded immediate attention. No name tag, no rank insignia. Nothing but the steady, measured pace of someone who knew exactly where she belonged. "That's her," whispered Rivera to Donovan. "Doesn't look like much." Donovan shrugged. "Probably never even touched a real Super Stallion." The woman, Hayes, according to the visitor badge clipped to her pocket, moved methodically through the hangar, occasionally stopping to make notes on her tablet. She seemed to take no notice of the sideways glances and whispered comments, her focus entirely on the aircraft and systems around her. When she approached the hydraulic system that Rivera was working on, she paused, watching silently. "Something I can help you with, ma'am?" Rivera asked, not bothering to hide his annoyance at being observed. "Just documenting," Hayes replied, her voice quiet but assured. Rivera resumed his work, deliberately turning his back to her. "Standard hydraulic calibration. Nothing exciting." Hayes said nothing, but after observing for another moment, she reached past him and made a small adjustment to the calibration tool. The digital readout immediately stabilized, showing perfect alignment. Rivera blinked in surprise. "How did you know to do that?" he asked. "Experience," she said simply, already moving on to the next station. Lieutenant Cortez, who had been watching the exchange, approached Rivera after Hayes moved away. "Careful with that one," he said quietly. "What do you mean?" Cortez shrugged. "Something's off about her. Flight instructors don't usually know their way around Super Stallion systems like that. Especially not the hydraulic calibration sequence. That's specialized knowledge." Rivera glanced over at Hayes, now examining a maintenance panel on the opposite side of the hangar. "Maybe she just got lucky." "Maybe," Cortez replied, but he didn't sound convinced. As the morning progressed, Hayes continued her methodical inspection of the hangar and aircraft. She moved with an economy of motion that suggested familiarity with military environments, though she wore no insignia to indicate any service background beyond basic instructor credentials. The mechanics gradually returned to their work, though many kept casting curious glances in her direction. During lunch break, Petty Officer Collins pulled up her credentials on the secure terminal. The screen displayed only minimal information: Flight Training Consultant, Naval Aviation Program. "That's it?" Rivera asked, peering over Collins' shoulder. "No background? No qualifications?" Collins shook his head. "Nothing else accessible at my clearance level." "Weird," muttered Donovan. "Think she's some kind of corporate spy? Sikorsky trying to steal secrets?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, Subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Collins chuckled. Doubt it. This bird's been flying for decades. Rivera pulled out his phone. Let me try something. He typed Hayes' name into a search engine, scrolling through the results. Nothing, not even a LinkedIn profile. Who doesn't have a digital footprint these days? Someone who doesn't want to be found, Collins said thoughtfully. Across the hangar, Hayes continued her inspection, seemingly oblivious to the discussion about her identity. She moved to the cockpit of the CH-53 and peered inside, her fingers hovering over the controls without touching them. For just a moment, something flickered across her face. A look of recognition, perhaps even longing. The afternoon brought new challenges. As Hayes observed the communication systems check, she quietly suggested bypassing a secondary router when an error appeared. The system immediately responded, booting up normally. How did you know that would work? Rivera asked, studying her face carefully. Common issue with the Mark IV system, she replied. The bypass trick isn't in the manual, but most field technicians know about it. But you're not a field technician, Rivera said suspiciously. Hayes held his gaze for a moment. No, she said simply, then moved away to continue her inspection. Later, when an emergency drill was announced, the crew scrambled to their assigned positions. To everyone's surprise, Hayes moved without hesitation to exactly the right position for the drill scenario, her movements automatic and practiced. Senior Chief Petty Officer Martinez noticed this and watched her with growing curiosity. Something about her seemed familiar. The way she moved around aircraft, her instinctive understanding of procedures. After the drill, he discreetly accessed a secure terminal and began searching through archived mission files. What he found made him freeze in place. On the screen was a grainy image from 3 years earlier, a younger Hayes in full flight gear standing before a CH-53. The file was stamped Classified Operation Scorched Earth with a note. Personnel record restricted by order of Naval Command. Martinez stared at the screen, then back across the hangar where Hayes continued her quiet inspection. Who was this woman really? And why was she at Sandstone pretending to be a flight instructor? As the afternoon wore on, tensions in the hangar subtly increased. Word had spread among the senior staff that something wasn't adding up about their visitor. The younger mechanics picked up on the change in atmosphere, their jokes and casual banter gradually falling silent as they focused on their work. Hayes seemed to sense the shift as well. Her movements became more guarded, her note-taking more deliberate. She kept her distance from the groups of whispering personnel, focusing entirely on her inspection tasks. The day was ending, but everyone could feel it. Something was building. The woman they dismissed as just another instructor was hiding something significant. And in a place like Sandstone Naval Air Station, secrets had a way of coming to light when least expected. As Hayes packed up her tablet and prepared to leave, she paused near the CH-53's engine housing, her hand resting briefly on the aircraft's surface. In that moment, she looked less like a civilian instructor and more like someone who had once called this magnificent machine home. The truth was closer to the surface than anyone realized, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The next morning arrived with an unusual tension hanging over Hangar 4. Hayes returned precisely at 0800, once again in her unmarked flight instructor uniform, carrying the same tablet and personal kit. But today felt different. The easy dismissal from the previous day had been replaced by wary curiosity from the ground crew. Chief Petty Officer Donovan was the first to notice the change in dynamics. As Hayes approached his workstation, he found himself straightening unconsciously, his casual demeanor from yesterday nowhere to be found. "Morning, ma'am," he said, his tone notably more respectful than before. Hayes nodded acknowledgement. "Chief, how's the transmission oil pressure holding on the starboard system?" Donovan blinked. Yesterday she'd been asking general questions about documentation. Today she was asking about specific technical details that weren't in any routine inspection checklist. "Pressure's been solid at 3,200 psi, he replied automatically, then caught himself. "Ma'am, that information isn't typically part of a training assessment." "Isn't it?" Hayes made a note on her tablet. "I find transmission consistency often indicates overall maintenance quality." Across the hangar, Petty Officer Rivera was having his own unsettling encounter. Hayes had stopped beside him as he worked on the aircraft's communication array, but instead of simply observing, She'd begun pointing out potential improvement points that weren't in any standard manual. The auxiliary relay tends to overheat in this configuration, she mentioned casually. You might consider routing the power coupling through the secondary channel. Rivera paused his work, wrench halfway to a bolt. Ma'am, respectfully, that modification isn't authorized without engineering approval. Of course not, Hayes agreed. I'm just noting potential efficiency improvements. But her suggestions were too specific, too knowledgeable. Rivera exchanged glances with nearby mechanics, all of whom were beginning to realize their civilian instructor knew far more about the CH-53 than any outside consultant should. Senior Chief Martinez had spent the night researching what little he could find about Operation Scorched Earth. The details were still classified, but he managed to piece together fragments. A high-risk extraction mission 3 years ago, impossible odds, a single CH-53 that had somehow pulled off what an entire squadron couldn't accomplish. The pilot's identity had been scrubbed from official records afterward. He approached Hayes during her mid-morning inspection of the navigation systems. Ms. Hayes, he said carefully, I noticed you seem particularly familiar with the Super Stallion's operational parameters. Hayes didn't look up from her tablet. I've studied the technical specifications extensively. Have you? Martinez moved closer, lowering his voice. Because the way you move around this aircraft, the questions you're asking, it's not like someone who learned from manuals. For the first time since arriving, Hayes' composure flickered. She met Martinez's eyes directly, and he saw something there. Not fear, but a careful assessment. I take my work seriously, Chief, she said finally. I'm sure you do. Martinez nodded slowly. It's just that in my 20 years working on these aircraft, I've only seen that level of intuitive understanding from pilots who've actually flown them. The words hung in the air between them. Hayes resumed her work without responding, but Martinez noticed her movements had become more deliberate, more guarded. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Cortez had been conducting his own investigation. During lunch, he'd called a contact at the Pentagon, someone who owed him a favor from their deployment days. I need you to run a name for me, Cortez had said quietly into his phone. Morgan Hayes. Supposed to be a flight instructor, but something doesn't add up. The response had been immediate and troubling. Cortez, don't ask questions about that name, and if you're smart, you'll forget you ever heard it. When Cortez returned to the hangar, he found Hayes examining the ejection systems, an area that definitely wasn't part of any routine training assessment. Interesting area to inspect, he commented, approaching slowly. Hayes didn't seem surprised by his presence. Safety systems are crucial components. They are, Cortez agreed. But training instructors typically don't have clearance to examine emergency evacuation mechanisms. Those systems are classified. Hayes's fingers paused over her tablet. I have the appropriate clearances. Do you? Cortez pulled out his phone, showing her the screen. Because when I tried to verify your background, I got told to stop asking questions. In my experience, that usually means one of two things. Either you're someone very important, or you're someone who's supposed to be invisible. The afternoon brought an unexpected complication. Captain Lawrence, the base commander, arrived for an unscheduled inspection, accompanied by 2 officers Hayes didn't recognize. Their presence immediately changed the atmosphere in the hangar. Where's our training consultant? Lawrence asked Senior Chief Martinez. Over by the fuel system, sir, Martinez replied, gesturing toward Hayes. Lawrence studied Hayes from across the hangar, his expression unreadable. How long has she been here? This is her 2nd day, sir. Yesterday she seemed like a routine instructor, but today... Martinez hesitated. Today she's asking questions and making observations that suggest extensive operational knowledge of the CH-53. One of the officers with Lawrence, a stern-faced woman with intelligence insignia, spoke quietly. Sir, we should speak with her directly. As the group approached, Hayes seemed to sense their presence. She looked up from her tablet, and for just a moment, her professional mask slipped. The expression that crossed her face was one of recognition, followed immediately by resignation. Miss Hayes, Captain Lawrence called out. Could we have a word? Hayes straightened, suddenly looking less like an instructor and more like military personnel. "Of course, Captain." The entire hangar seemed to hold its breath as the group moved to a more private area near the office. Through the glass windows, the mechanics could see an intense conversation taking place but couldn't make out the words. Rivera moved closer to Donovan. "Think she's in trouble?" "I think," Donovan said slowly, "we're about to find out who she really is." Inside the office, Captain Lawrence was studying a classified file on his tablet. "Lieutenant Commander Morgan Hayes," he read aloud, "formerly one of our most decorated CH-53 pilots, officially grounded and reassigned as of 3 years ago." Hayes stood at attention, her civilian facade completely dropped. "Sir," she acknowledged simply. "The question is," Lawrence continued, "what is a grounded pilot doing conducting training assessments at my base?" The intelligence officer leaned forward. "Commander, your record shows you were permanently grounded after the Scorched Earth operation. Your flight privileges were revoked by direct order of Admiral Wilson." "The pilot Morgan Hayes was grounded that day," Hayes replied carefully. "What remained was an instructor with limited clearance and limited purpose." Lawrence nodded grimly. "And now you're here, hiding in plain sight as a consultant. The question is why?" Through the office window, the ground crew watched the tense meeting. Whatever was being discussed, it was clear their mysterious instructor wasn't who she'd claimed to be. Petty Officer Rivera turned to the older mechanics. "Anyone want to explain what's happening?" Senior Chief Martinez, who had been quietly listening to radio chatter, suddenly straightened. "Everyone back to work," he commanded. "Now." But it was too late. The base alarm system activated, its urgent wail filling the hangar. Emergency lights began flashing as the intercom crackled to life. "Attention all personnel. Code Red. Repeat. Code Red. All flight crews report to stations immediately." In the office, Hayes' head snapped up at the sound. Through the window, the mechanics could see her posture change completely. No longer an instructor or even a regular officer, but someone responding to a crisis with the instincts of a combat pilot. Captain Lawrence was receiving updates through his earpiece. "We have Marines pinned down in the Gulf," he said grimly. "They need immediate helicopter extraction, but our primary pilots are all deployed on carrier operations." Hayes stepped forward. "Sir, request permission to—" "You're officially grounded, Commander," the intelligence officer interrupted. "You can't fly a rescue mission." Hayes' jaw tightened. "Those Marines don't care about my official status, ma'am." Outside, the ground crew was mobilizing for an emergency launch, but they could see the heated discussion continuing in the office. Their mysterious instructor, who was apparently a pilot, was clearly volunteering for something dangerous. Senior Chief Martinez turned to his team. "I don't know who she really is," he said quietly, "but I'm starting to think we're about to find out why they call her the Valkyrie." The emergency was escalating, and everyone could sense that the carefully maintained fiction of Morgan Hayes' identity was about to be shattered completely. The heated discussion in the office continued as emergency protocols activated throughout the base. Through the glass, the mechanics could see Hayes' posture becoming increasingly tense as Captain Lawrence spoke rapidly into his earpiece. The intelligence officer kept shaking her head, clearly opposing whatever Hayes was proposing. Outside, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Senior Chief Martinez was monitoring radio communications when the desperate voice of the Marine commander crackled through. Any station. This is Rattlesnake Actual. We are pinned down by hostile forces. Multiple casualties. Request immediate extraction or we will be overrun within 30 minutes. The words sent a chill through the hangar. 23 Marines were trapped, and conventional extraction assets were hours away. Only a helicopter already prepped and ready could reach them in time, but their qualified pilots were all engaged in carrier operations 50 miles offshore. Lieutenant Cortez approached the office door, hoping to catch some of the conversation inside. What he heard made his blood run cold. "I don't care what the regulations say," Hayes' voice carried through the glass. "Those Marines are going to die if someone doesn't act." "Commander, you were grounded for a reason," the intelligence officer replied firmly. "If this mission fails, if you're captured, if anything goes wrong, it creates an international incident." "A grounded pilot flying an unauthorized mission would be completely deniable," Hayes finished. "No official sanction, no political complications. That's exactly why this works." Captain Lawrence's voice was strained. "The risk to you personally?" Is irrelevant, sir. Those are American Marines. Suddenly, the office door opened, and all three officers emerged. The entire hangar fell silent as they approached the CH-53. Hayes walked directly to Senior Chief Martinez. "Chief, what's the status of this aircraft?" she asked. Martinez glanced uncertainly at Captain Lawrence, who gave a slight nod. "Fully fueled and operational, ma'am. Ready for immediate deployment." Hayes nodded, then turned to address the assembled crew. "I need this aircraft prepped for emergency extraction. Full combat configuration." Petty Officer Rivera stepped forward, confusion evident on his face. "Ma'am, respectfully, you're a flight instructor. You can't authorize—" "No," Hayes interrupted, her voice carrying new authority. "I'm not." She reached into her personal kit and withdrew a faded patch. The Valkyrie insignia awarded only to pilots of the most classified helicopter operations. The few senior mechanics who recognized it immediately came to attention. 3 years ago, Lieutenant Commander Hayes was permanently grounded after Operation Scorched Earth, she continued, her voice steady. What remained was too valuable to lose completely, but today, 23 Marines need someone who can fly this mission. The intelligence officer stepped forward. "This is completely unauthorized." "Then it's on me," Hayes replied firmly. "No official sanction, no orders from command, just a flight instructor who happened to know how to fly." Captain Lawrence weighed the options. His career would be over if this went badly, but those Marines would be dead if nothing was done. "Senior Chief Martinez," he called out. "How long to prep for emergency launch?" 15 minutes, sir." Lawrence nodded grimly. "Do it!" The hangar exploded into activity. The same mechanics who had dismissed Hayes 2 days ago now worked with desperate efficiency to prepare the CH-53 for combat. But the tension was palpable. Everyone understood they were participating in something that officially wasn't happening. Hayes began suiting up, accepting flight gear from crew members who now looked at her with a mixture of awe and concern. Rivera approached hesitantly. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology. Yesterday when you walked in, I thought—" "You thought exactly what you were supposed to think," Hayes replied, adjusting her flight helmet. "That was the point." "But who are you, really?" Hayes paused in her preparations. Someone who made choices that required her wings to be clipped. But today, that doesn't matter. What matters is getting to those Marines. As final systems checks were completed, Senior Chief Martinez pulled Captain Lawrence aside. "Sir, I've been thinking about this. If Commander Hayes was officially grounded 3 years ago, what's she been doing since then?" Lawrence's expression was grim. "According to what little I can access, she's been conducting training assessments at various naval installations, always under different consultant identities, always moving on after a few days. She's been keeping watch," Martinez realized. "Making sure our aircraft are mission-ready. That's my guess. And now we know why." The radio crackled with another desperate transmission from the Marines. "This is Rattlesnake Actual. Hostile forces are within visual range. If anyone is coming, we need them now." Hayes finished her final equipment check and turned to face the assembled crew. For a moment, the careful mask she'd worn for 2 days was completely gone. Standing before them was a combat pilot, scarred by whatever had happened during Scorched Earth, but ready to risk everything again. "Senior Chief Martinez," she called out. "Aircraft status?" "Ready for immediate departure, Commander." Hayes nodded, then surprised everyone by extending her hand to each crew member. "Thank you, all of you." Rivera shook her hand, still struggling with the transformation he'd witnessed. "Commander, what happened 3 years ago during Scorched Earth?" Hayes' expression darkened. "We saved hostages, but the cost—" She shook her head. "Some missions require sacrifices that can't be officially acknowledged." She climbed the ladder to the cockpit, pausing at the top to look back at the crew. "If I don't make it back, make sure those Marines know someone tried." "You'll make it back," Lieutenant Cortez called out. "That's what Valkyries do. They retrieve warriors and vanish. Hayes offered a slight smile. "We'll see." The canopy closed with a hydraulic hiss. Inside the cockpit, Hayes began the startup sequence with practiced precision. The massive rotors spooled up, their deep rumble filling the hangar. "Tower, this is Rescue 1. Hayes's voice came through the radio, requesting immediate departure clearance. "Rescue 1, you are cleared for takeoff. Runway 27. Winds light and variable." As the CH-53 lifted off, Captain Lawrence turned to his intelligence officer. "This conversation never happened. This mission never occurred. Is that understood?" "Sir, if this goes wrong, 23 families don't lose their sons and daughters tonight. That's what matters." The distinctive silhouette of the Super Stallion lifted into the darkening sky, banking sharply toward its distant target. In the hangar, the crew stood in respectful silence, knowing they had just witnessed something extraordinary. Martinez spoke quietly to the group. "Whatever happens next, remember this: Lieutenant Commander Hayes was grounded 3 years ago. Today, a flight instructor borrowed an aircraft to save some lives. That's the story." Rivera nodded slowly, finally understanding. "She's been protecting us all along, hasn't she? Moving from base to base, making sure we're ready for moments like this." "That's my guess," Cortez replied. The Valkyrie watching over the fleet. Radio communications would be minimal during the mission, but everyone in Hangar 4 would be listening. Somewhere over hostile waters, their mysterious instructor was about to prove exactly who she really was. The waiting began. The command center at Sandstone Naval Air Station had been transformed into a nerve center of controlled tension. Multiple screens displayed satellite feeds, weather data, and communication channels, all focused on a mission that officially didn't exist. Captain Lawrence stood behind the communications officer, his jaw tight as he monitored Rescue 1's progress. "Current position?" he asked quietly. "Rescue 1 is maintaining radio silence as planned, sir. Last GPS showed her on course, altitude 500 feet, approximately 15 minutes from target." In Hangar 4, the ground crew had gathered around a radio, listening to the sporadic updates. The Marines' situation was deteriorating rapidly. Their last transmission had been particularly desperate. Any station. Enemy forces advancing on our position. We've got wounded who can't be moved. If extraction doesn't arrive in the next 15 minutes, we're done for." Senior Chief Martinez adjusted the radio frequency, hoping to catch any word from Hayes. "Combat pilots usually maintain communications blackout during approach," he explained to the younger mechanics. "Too much risk of detection." Petty Officer Rivera, who had spent the day grappling with his complete misjudgment of Hayes, spoke up. "Chief, what really happened during Operation Scorched Earth? Why was she grounded?" Martinez glanced around at the assembled crew, then made a decision. "What I'm about to tell you stays in this hangar. Understood?" Everyone nodded. 3 years ago, there was a hostage situation overseas. 12 American civilians were being held in a compound that was impossible to reach with conventional forces. Intelligence said it couldn't be done. Too many anti-aircraft positions. Too much hostile territory to cross. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Commander Hayes volunteered for a solo mission. One CH-53 flying lower than anyone thought possible. No escort, no backup. Lieutenant Cortez leaned forward. "She pulled it off?" "More than that," Martinez's voice dropped. "She didn't just complete the mission. She rewrote the book on what was possible. But in the process, she had to make choices that weren't authorized. Rules of engagement were exceeded. Enemy targets were eliminated that weren't on the approved list." "Meaning?" Rivera asked. "Meaning she saved every hostage, but the political fallout would have been catastrophic if it came to light. So the brass grounded her. Permanent flight restriction. Full investigation. Sealed records." "And unofficially?" Cortez asked. "Unofficially, they gave her a new role and turned her loose to do what she does best. Keep our aircraft and pilots ready for the impossible missions." The radio crackled with static. Then Hayes' voice came through, calm and professional. "Command, this is Rescue 1. Beginning approach to target area. Marine frequency Please confirm your status. The response was immediate and tense. Rescue 1. This is Rattlesnake Actual. We've got enemy forces less than 200 meters out. Whatever you're planning, we need it now. Roger, Rattlesnake Actual. I have visual on your position. Pop smoke for landing zone identification. In the command center, Captain Lawrence gripped the back of a chair. This was the moment of truth. Either Hayes would pull off another miracle, or they would lose both her and the Marines. Meanwhile, 30 miles away, Hayes was threading the CH-53 through a narrow coastal ravine at an altitude that would have been considered suicidal for most pilots. The terrain-following radar was screaming warnings, but she trusted her instincts more than the computer. The battlefield appeared ahead through her night vision systems. She could see the Marines' position marked by infrared strobes and the approaching enemy forces moving through the scrubland. Purple smoke began to billow from the Marines' location. Rattlesnake Actual, I have visual on purple smoke, coming in hot from the southeast. Prepare for immediate extraction. The CH-53's sophisticated systems locked onto the landing zone, but Hayes knew the real challenge would be the exposed approach. The helicopter would be completely vulnerable during the critical moments of landing. Rattlesnake Actual, weapons hot. Find cover. Roger, Rescue 1. All personnel taking cover. Hayes completed the final approach sequence, her hands steady on the controls despite the danger. The CH-53 descended rapidly, kicking up a massive cloud of dust as its wheels touched down on the rocky ground. Incoming fire! Came the shout over the radio as enemy rounds began pinging off the helicopter's armored hull. Loading now! 20 seconds! The Marine commander reported. Hayes kept the rotors at full power, ready for immediate departure. Through the swirling dust, she could see Marines carrying their wounded comrades, running in a hunched posture toward the open ramp of the CH-53. 15 seconds! A rocket-propelled grenade streaked past the cockpit, missing by mere feet. Hayes didn't flinch, her focus absolute as she made micro-adjustments to keep the helicopter stable. All aboard! Go, go, go! Came the final call. Hayes didn't need to be told twice. She pulled collective, the massive helicopter lifting into the night sky as enemy fire intensified around them. Banking hard to the right, she put the bulk of a nearby hill between them and the enemy positions. Rattlesnake Actual, head count, she demanded as they climbed. There was a pause as the Marine commander counted his men. 23 accounted for, 7 wounded, 3 critical. Hang on, Hayes replied. Medical support standing by at Sandstone. ETA. 22 minutes. In Hangar 4, a cheer went up from the assembled crew. Rivera found himself grinning, despite the tension of the situation. But the mission wasn't over. Hayes still had to exit the hostile area without being detected, and enemy air defenses would be fully alerted now. Command, this is Rescue 1. Hayes' voice came through the radio, tension creeping in for the first time. I've been painted by hostile radar, taking evasive action. The celebration in the hangar died instantly. Everyone knew that being painted meant enemy missiles could be inbound. Captain Lawrence pressed his earpiece. Rescue 1, we have no assets available to assist. You're on your own. Understood, Command. Going dark. The radio went silent. For the next hour, there would be no way to know if Hayes had escaped or been shot down. The waiting was agonizing. Senior Chief Martinez turned to his crew. That's what real pilots do, he said quietly. They accept impossible missions and somehow make them possible. Think she'll make it back? Rivera asked. Cortez was studying the flight plan on a computer terminal. If anyone can, it's her. The Valkyrie didn't get that nickname by accident. In the CH-53, Hayes was flying purely on instinct now. With all non-essential systems powered down to minimize electronic signature, she was navigating by landmarks and stars, keeping the helicopter mere feet above the waves to avoid radar detection. In the cargo area behind her, the Marines had transformed the space into a makeshift medical bay, working desperately to stabilize their most critically wounded. Their commander, Captain Rodriguez, made his way to the cockpit and strapped into the co-pilot's seat. I didn't catch your name, ma'am, he he said, his voice betraying his exhaustion. Hayes, she replied, not taking her eyes off the darkness ahead. Lieutenant Commander Morgan Hayes. Rodriguez studied her profile in the dim glow of the essential instruments. You fly like someone with a lot more experience than your rank suggests. I've had practice, she said simply. Well, whatever your story is, 23 families owe you everything tonight. He paused. Including mine. I've got 2 kids who still have a father because of you. Hayes allowed herself a brief glance at him. Just doing my job, Captain. No, Rodriguez shook his head. That wasn't a job. That was something else entirely. They flew in silence for several minutes, the only sound the thrumming of the rotors and the occasional update from the Marines working on their wounded comrades. They grounded you, didn't they? Rodriguez asked suddenly. I can see it in your eyes. You've got the look of someone who's been kept from what they love. Hayes's hands tightened imperceptibly on the controls. Something like that. Why would they ground their best pilot? Because sometimes being the best means making choices that make powerful people uncomfortable. Her voice was barely audible above the engine noise. And sometimes saving lives isn't enough to outweigh breaking rules. As they approached friendly waters, Hayes began powering up her essential systems again. The navigation displays flickered to life, confirming what her instincts had already told her. They were on course for Sandstone, having successfully evaded enemy detection. Command, this is Rescue 1, she called, breaking radio silence. Mission accomplished. 23 Marines aboard, 7 wounded, 3 critical. Request medical teams standing by. ETA, 12 minutes. The relief in the command center was palpable. Rescue 1, this is Command. Medical teams are prepped and waiting. You are cleared for priority approach. As the hours passed, tension in both the hangar and command center reached painful levels. The Marines had been successfully evacuated, but there was still the matter of what would happen to Hayes. The mission had been unauthorized, conducted by a pilot who had been explicitly forbidden from flying. Then, just before dawn, the distinctive sound of a CH-53's rotors filled the air. The helicopter appeared against the pre-dawn sky, settling onto the runway with Hayes's characteristic precision. As the aircraft taxied back to Hangar 4, the entire ground crew assembled in formation, not because they were ordered to, but out of genuine respect. Medical teams rushed forward as the ramp lowered, quickly transferring the wounded Marines to waiting ambulances. The walking wounded followed, each one pausing to look back at the cockpit in silent gratitude. When Hayes finally emerged, she looked exhausted, but composed. She handed her flight data to Senior Chief Martinez. Aircraft performed flawlessly, she reported. No issues to note. Captain Lawrence approached with several senior officers. Outstanding work, Commander. Those Marines owe you their lives. Hayes simply nodded. They were doing their job, sir. I was doing mine. The intelligence officer who had opposed the mission was notably silent, her expression unreadable as she watched the Marines being loaded into ambulances. Marines who would have died without Hayes's intervention. As dawn broke fully over Sandstone Naval Air Station, Hayes gathered her few belongings. The mission was complete, but everyone understood that her time here was ending. She couldn't stay. Too many questions would be asked. Too much attention drawn to someone who was supposed to be invisible. Rivera approached her one final time. Commander, will we see you again? Hayes offered a slight smile. You'll never see me coming, Petty Officer, but when you need me most, I'll be there. She walked toward a waiting vehicle, then paused and turned back to the assembled crew. Take care of each other and take care of that aircraft. You never know when someone might need to borrow it. With that, she climbed into the car and was driven away, disappearing once more into the anonymity that had protected her for 3 years. The crew stood in respectful silence, watching until the vehicle disappeared from sight. They had witnessed something extraordinary. The return of a legend who had never really left, just remained hidden in plain sight, ready for the moment when impossible became necessary. The Valkyrie had flown again, and 23 American families would never know how close they had come to tragedy, or who had saved their loved ones in the darkness before dawn. 3 weeks after Hayes's dramatic mission, Sandstone Naval Air Station had settled back into its routine operations. But the story of the mysterious flight instructor had taken on a life of its own. Despite orders to maintain secrecy, word had spread through the tight military aviation community. Pilots and ground crews from other bases were calling with questions, trying to verify if the legend they'd heard was true. Captain Lawrence found himself fielding increasingly uncomfortable inquiries from Pentagon officials who had somehow caught wind of the unauthorized mission. In his office, he reviewed the carefully sanitized after-action report for the dozenth time, ensuring every detail supported the official fiction. "Sir," his aide knocked on the door. "Admiral Wilson is online for you. He says it's about the training assessment incident." Lawrence's stomach dropped. Admiral Wilson was the Naval Aviation Commander, not someone who called about routine matters. "Captain Lawrence?" The Admiral's voice was carefully neutral when Lawrence picked up. "I understand you had an interesting visitor recently." "Sir, I'm not sure what you're referring to." "A flight instructor who happened to be qualified to fly emergency extractions." "Come now, Captain. I may be old, but I'm not stupid." Lawrence closed his eyes. "Sir, I can neither confirm nor deny." "Relax, Captain. You did the right thing. Those Marines are alive because you made a command decision, but we need to talk about the bigger picture." Meanwhile, at Hangar 4, the ground crew was dealing with their own complications. A team of naval investigators had arrived that morning, asking pointed questions about the instructor who had been present during the emergency. Senior Chief Martinez faced the lead investigator, Lieutenant Commander Foster, across a small table in the hangar office. "So this Morgan Hayes," Foster consulted his notes. "She was here for how long?" 2 days, sir. Routine training assessment." "And during the emergency, she just left?" Martinez kept his expression neutral. "Yes, sir." "I assume she didn't want to interfere with military operations." Foster studied Martinez's face carefully. "That's interesting, Chief, because we have radio recordings that suggest a flight instructor was present during mission planning." "Sir, there was a lot of confusion during the emergency. People might have misspoken." The investigator wasn't buying it, but Martinez had been in the military long enough to know how to reveal nothing while technically telling the truth. In another part of the base, Petty Officer Rivera was having his own encounter with the investigation team. A stern intelligence officer, Commander Patel, had pulled him aside for questioning. "Rivera, we need to know exactly what this instructor said and did while she was here." Rivera shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, she mostly just observed our work and took notes, but she demonstrated unusual knowledge of aircraft systems. I guess she just seemed to know her stuff." Commander Patel leaned forward. "Rivera, this isn't a game. We have 23 rescued Marines and a missing CH-53 flight record from that night. Someone flew that mission, and we need to know who." Rivera met her gaze steadily. "Ma'am, I was in the hangar the whole time. I saw our scheduled pilots deploy with the carrier group that morning. After that, I was focused on my duties. I didn't see anyone else qualified to fly." It was technically true. Rivera hadn't seen Hayes' official qualifications, only her actions. Commander Patel made a note, clearly frustrated by the careful non-answers she was receiving. Across the country, in a small apartment in Norfolk, Morgan Hayes was monitoring news reports about the successful Marine rescue. The official story credited Rapid Response Assets with saving the pinned-down unit. No mention of the pilot, no details about the aircraft used. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Package delivered successfully. Client satisfaction high. New opportunities available." Hayes deleted the message without responding. She'd been expecting this word of the Sandstone mission had reached the right circles. Other bases, other emergencies, other situations where someone with her unique combination of skills and official non-existence might be needed. But something felt different this time. For 3 years, she'd moved from base to base, conducting real training assessments while maintaining her cover, always staying ahead of anyone who might look too closely. The mission at Sandstone had been necessary, but it had also been visible. Too visible. Her laptop chimed with an encrypted email. The sender was identified only as Odin, but Hayes recognized the secure communication protocol. She'd been wondering when this contact would come. "Valkyrie, your recent performance evaluation has been noted. Recommend immediate relocation to new assignment. Package includes transportation and documentation. Confirm receipt. Attached were plane tickets to San Diego and a new instructor ID. this time as Samantha Winters, specializing in helicopter navigation systems. Another base, another identity, another chance to disappear into the background until needed again. But as Hayes packed her few belongings, she found herself thinking about the crew at Sandstone. For the first time in 3 years, she'd allowed people to see who she really was, even if only for a moment. The respect in Rivera's eyes when he'd realized his mistake, the professional camaraderie of working with Martinez and his team, the satisfaction of using her skills to save lives rather than just maintaining equipment. It had reminded her of what she'd lost when she'd accepted the grounded existence. Back at Sandstone, the investigation was wrapping up with predictably inconclusive results. The investigators had found no evidence of unauthorized personnel involvement in the mission, no proof that anyone other than qualified military pilots had access to the CH-53, and certainly no indication that a grounded pilot had returned to active duty. Captain Lawrence was summoned to a final meeting with Admiral Wilson, this time via secure video conference. "Captain, I'm going to speak plainly," the Admiral began. "We both know what happened at your base. We also both know that officially it didn't happen. The question is whether you can live with that arrangement." "Sir, I'm not sure I understand. The woman who flew that mission, she's been operating in a gray area for 3 years. Technically, she's grounded. Practically, she's one of our most valuable assets. The Pentagon has been quietly monitoring her movements, and frankly, we've been impressed." Lawrence blinked in surprise. "Sir, are you saying—" "I'm saying that sometimes the best way to protect an asset is to let the world think it doesn't exist. Commander Hayes made choices during Scorched Earth that saved lives but couldn't be officially sanctioned. Rather than lose a hero, we gave her a different kind of service." "So this was all authorized?" Admiral Wilson smiled grimly. "Captain, if it had been authorized, there would be paperwork. If there's no paperwork, then officially nothing happened. But unofficially, those Marines are alive, because you had the good sense to let a qualified pilot do her job." The truth was more complex than anyone at Sandstone had realized. Hayes hadn't gone rogue 3 years ago. She'd been recruited into a shadow program that used her unique situation to place her exactly where she was needed most. The training assessments were real, but they were also cover for a deeper mission, maintaining readiness for the impossible scenarios that conventional military planning couldn't address. In San Diego, Samantha Winters, formerly Morgan Hayes, was settling into her new assignment at Coronado Naval Base. The CH-53 Seahawk helicopters there presented different challenges than the CH-53, but the principle was the same: ensure the aircraft were ready when heroes needed to do heroic things. Her new supervisor, Chief Warrant Officer Sullivan, briefed her on the facility. "We've got a good crew here, Ms. Winters. Professional, dedicated. They take their work seriously." "That's exactly what I like to hear, Chief." As she toured the massive hangar filled with naval helicopters, Hayes noticed the same dynamic she'd seen everywhere. Crew members who were competent, but had never been tested in truly impossible circumstances. They were good at their jobs, but they didn't know how good they could be when everything was on the line. Her phone buzzed with another encrypted message. "New assignment parameters. Maintain cover. Conduct standard assessments. Prepare for potential maritime extraction mission in contested waters. Asset readiness critical." Hayes smiled slightly. Somewhere, another group of service members might soon find themselves in an impossible situation. And when they did, they wouldn't know that their salvation was being prepared by a woman who officially couldn't fly, working with crews who didn't know they were training to save lives. The Valkyrie was ready to fly again whenever and wherever she was needed. At Sandstone, life had returned to normal, but the legend remained. New personnel would occasionally ask about the mysterious instructor who'd been there during the incident, but the answers were always the same. Just a routine training assessment, nothing unusual to report. But in quiet moments, when the hangar was empty except for the massive silhouette of the CH-53, the veteran crew members would sometimes pause and remember. They'd witnessed something extraordinary, the brief return of a legend who lived in the shadows, protecting those who protected others. And they knew that somewhere out there she was still watching, still ready, still ensuring that when the impossible became necessary, someone would be prepared to make it possible. The investigation was closed, the files were sealed, and officially nothing had ever happened. But 23 Marines were alive, and that was the only truth that really mattered. 6 months after the Sandstone incident, the shadow network that Hayes operated within was facing its own crisis. In a secure conference room buried 3 levels beneath the Pentagon, Admiral Wilson sat across from CIA Deputy Director Rachel Harrington, reviewing a troubling intelligence report. "Our Valkyrie asset has been compromised," Harrington said, sliding a classified folder across the table. "Foreign intelligence services are starting to connect the dots." Wilson opened the file, revealing surveillance photos of Hayes at various naval installations over the past 3 years. The images were grainy, taken from long distances, but they clearly showed the same person at bases where impossible missions had subsequently been carried out. "How bad is it?" Wilson asked. "Bad enough," Harrington replied. "They haven't identified her yet, but they know someone is moving through our system. Someone with capabilities that don't officially exist." Meanwhile, at Coronado Naval Base, Hayes was conducting what appeared to be a routine inspection of a Seahawk's avionics systems. But Chief Warrant Officer Sullivan had noticed something troubling about their instructor. She kept checking her phone, and her usual focused demeanor seemed strained. "Everything all right, Ms. Winters?" Sullivan asked during a break. "Just fine, Chief. How's the targeting system calibration holding on the primary weapons console?" It was a deflection, and Sullivan knew it. Over 6 months of working together, he'd come to respect Samantha Winters' expertise, but he'd also noticed that she sometimes seemed to know things that weren't in any manual. Today felt different, like she was expecting bad news. Hayes' encrypted phone buzzed with a priority message. "Odin to Valkyrie. Immediate extraction recommended. Your pattern has been identified by hostile intelligence. Extraction team inbound to your location." Hayes closed her eyes briefly. After 3 years of careful movement, someone had finally put together enough pieces to see the bigger picture. The question was whether they knew who she really was or just that she existed. She typed back, "Pattern confirmed. Request 24-hour delay for mission-critical assessment." The response was immediate. "Negative. Extraction non-negotiable. Report to designated coordinates in 2 hours." But Hayes had noticed something during her inspection that morning. Signs that Coronado was about to become much more important than anyone realized. Equipment staging, unusual flight planning, personnel assignments that suggested a major operation was being prepared. If she disappeared now, there might not be anyone qualified to handle whatever crisis was developing. At Sandstone Naval Air Station, Petty Officer Rivera, now promoted to first class, was monitoring communications when an encrypted priority message came through. The content made him sit up straight. Intelligence indicated that foreign operatives were actively hunting for a phantom pilot who had been involved in several classified helicopter missions. Rivera immediately contacted Captain Lawrence. "Sir, you need to see this intelligence brief. It's about our instructor from last year." Lawrence read the message with growing concern. "They're looking for her." "Sir, should we warn her somehow?" Lawrence was quiet for a moment. "Rivera, officially, we don't know who she is. We had a training instructor named Morgan Hayes who did routine work and left. That's all we know. But unofficially, I hope whoever is looking out for phantom pilots is keeping them safe." Back at Coronado, Hayes was facing an impossible choice. Her extraction team would arrive in 90 minutes, but abandoning her post now felt like betraying the principles that had driven her for 3 years. She'd accepted the grounded existence to serve a purpose, protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Chief Warrant Officer Sullivan approached her workstation. "Ms. Winters, we just received orders to prep 4 Seahawks for immediate overseas deployment. Special operations support." Hayes' blood chilled. Special operations meant high-risk, low-visibility missions. Exactly the kind of situation where having someone with her experience embedded in the support structure could mean the difference between success and disaster. "Timeline?" she asked. "Wheels up in 6 hours. Full combat load. Destination classified." Hayes made her decision. She typed an encrypted message. "Valkyrie to Odin. Cannot extract at this time. Special operations deployment imminent. My skills are needed here." The response was immediate and angry. "Extraction is not optional. Your cover is blown. Report to extraction point immediately." "Negative," Hayes typed back. "Mission takes priority." For the first time in 3 years, Morgan Hayes was officially disobeying orders. But she'd learned something important during her time in the shadows. Sometimes the greatest service required the greatest sacrifice. She turned off her encrypted phone and focused on the Seahawks being prepared around her. 4 aircraft, elite special operations teams. Destination unknown, but certainly dangerous. If something went wrong, if the mission parameters changed, if the impossible became necessary, she would be there. Sullivan noticed her sudden focus. "Something wrong, Ms. Winters?" "Just want to make sure everything is perfect, Chief. These crews are going into harm's way." 20 minutes later, Hayes' extraction team arrived at Coronado, posing as naval intelligence officers conducting a surprise inspection. Their leader, a cold-eyed woman in a civilian suit, approached Sullivan. "We're looking for your systems instructor, Samantha Winters. We need to speak with her immediately." Sullivan's instincts kicked in. These people didn't feel right. Too tense, too focused, too much like hunters who'd found their prey. "I'm sorry, but Ms. Winters is conducting critical mission prep work. She can't be interrupted." "This isn't a request, Chief. And this is a military installation preparing for combat operations," Sullivan replied firmly. "No one interrupts mission-critical work without proper authorization." The woman in the suit pulled out credentials that looked official but felt wrong. "These are proper authorization." Sullivan pretended to study the credentials while subtly activating a silent alarm that would alert base security. Something was very wrong here. Meanwhile, Hayes had noticed the commotion near the hangar entrance and recognized the signs of an extraction team that had shifted into hunting mode. They weren't here to protect her anymore. They were here to eliminate a security liability. She moved deeper into the hangar, using the massive aircraft as cover while she assessed her options. The Seahawks were nearly ready for departure, but the special operations teams hadn't arrived yet. If she could just maintain her cover for another few hours. Her commercial phone rang. The one not supposed to exist in Samantha Winters' identity. Only one person had that number. "Rivera," she answered quietly. "Commander, wherever you are, you need to know there are foreign intelligence operatives actively hunting for you. But there's also something else. We're monitoring chatter about a planned attack on Special Operations Forces tonight, wherever they're deploying." Hayes closed her eyes. The mission she was supporting wasn't just dangerous, it was compromised. And she was the only person in position to do anything about it. "Rivera, I need you to contact Captain Lawrence immediately. Tell him the Valkyrie says check the manifest on tonight's special deployment. Someone on the inside is feeding information to the enemy." "Commander, are you safe?" Hayes looked across the hangar at the extraction team that was now systematically searching for her. "Define safe, Rivera." She ended the call and made another impossible decision. The extraction team thought they were hunting a rogue intelligence asset. The foreign operatives were looking for a phantom pilot, but what they were all about to discover was something much more dangerous. A woman who had spent 3 years preparing for exactly this kind of betrayal. Morgan Hayes had accepted grounding once to serve her country. Tonight she might have to accept something far worse. But first, she had special operations teams to protect and a betrayal to expose. The Valkyrie was about to become visible one final time. The hangar at Coronado Naval Base had become a battlefield of wills and hidden identities. Hayes moved between the massive Seahawks, staying ahead of the extraction team that was systematically searching for her. She disabled the facility's external communications to prevent them from calling for backup, but that also meant she was cut off from any support. Chief Warrant Officer Sullivan was becoming increasingly suspicious of the naval intelligence officers. Their behavior, their questions, their obvious familiarity with combat tactics rather than bureaucratic procedures. Everything pointed to them being something other than what they claimed. "Ma'am," he said to the team leader, "I'm going to need you to wait in the visitor area while I contact my commanding officer." "That won't be necessary, Chief," the woman replied, her hand moving subtly toward her concealed weapon. "We just need to locate Ms. Winters for a routine security briefing." Sullivan's military instincts kicked in fully. These weren't intelligence officers. They were operators, and they were hunting someone on his base. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to insist." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the special operations teams who would be deploying on the Seahawks. 30 elite Navy SEALs in full combat gear entered the hangar, immediately changing the dynamic of the situation. The team leader, Commander Mitchell, approached Sullivan. "Chief, we're here for the 2100 deployment. Are the aircraft ready?" "Yes, sir, but we have a situation developing." "What kind of situation?" Before Sullivan could respond, Hayes emerged from behind one of the aircraft. She'd made a decision. The only way to protect the Special Operations mission was to expose herself completely. "Commander Mitchell," she called out, her voice carrying the authority that had been hidden beneath Samantha Winter's civilian instructor facade. "Your mission has been compromised. There's a leak in your intelligence chain." Mitchell turned, studying Hayes carefully. "And you are?" "Someone who's been watching your six for longer than you know." The extraction team leader stepped forward aggressively. "Commander, that woman is a security risk. We need to take her into custody immediately." Mitchell looked between Hayes and the supposed intelligence officers, his tactical mind processing the conflicting information. Something wasn't adding up. Hayes made the choice to trust him. "Commander, check your mission parameters against what happened to Operation Silverfin 4 months ago. Same intelligence source, same operational security, same kind of random enemy contact that shouldn't have been possible." Mitchell's expression sharpened. Operation Silverfin had been a disaster, a supposedly secure special operations mission that had walked into a perfectly prepared ambush. Only quick thinking and superior training had prevented it from becoming a massacre. "How do you know about Silverfin?" Mitchell demanded. "Because I've been tracking the pattern for 2 years. Someone in your intelligence chain has been feeding information to enemy forces. Tonight's mission follows the same profile." The extraction team leader was reaching for her weapon when Chief Sullivan stepped between her and Hayes. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some actual credentials, the kind that can be verified through official channels." It was the moment everything changed. The extraction team leader, realizing that their cover was blown and their mission was failing, made a fatal decision. She drew her weapon, pointing it at Sullivan. "Step aside, Chief. Now." The hangar erupted into controlled chaos. The SEAL team immediately took defensive positions, their own weapons drawn. Hayes dove behind the landing gear of the nearest Seahawk, her mind racing through tactical options. Commander Mitchell's voice cut through the tension. "Lower your weapons immediately. Identify yourselves." "We're naval intelligence conducting a classified operation," the team leader said, but her authority was evaporating rapidly. "If you're naval intelligence," Mitchell replied coldly, "then you know that threatening military personnel during active combat preparations is treason." Hayes realized this was her moment. She stepped out from cover, hands visible but ready. "Commander Mitchell, my name is Morgan Hayes. Former helicopter pilot, officially grounded, currently operating under classified assignment. These people are not naval intelligence. They're here to eliminate a witness to 3 years of unauthorized operations." Mitchell studied her face, then spoke into his radio. "Base security to Hangar 12. Priority 1. We have a hostile team on site." The extraction team leader made her final mistake. She shifted her weapon toward Hayes. And that was all the provocation SEAL operators needed. In seconds, the threat was neutralized with the precise efficiency that made them elite. As base security secured the scene, Hayes approached Commander Mitchell. "Commander, you need to scrub tonight's mission. The intelligence package is compromised." "Based on what evidence?" Hayes handed him her encrypted phone showing the communication log she'd been monitoring. "The same signature digital fingerprints that preceded Silverfin, Operation Blackwater, and 3 other compromised missions. Someone with high-level access has been selling your people out." Mitchell studied the data, his expression growing darker. "This intelligence came from Captain James Westfield, Naval Intelligence Division," Hayes finished. "He's been feeding operational details to foreign bidders for at least 2 years." The weight of the revelation settled over the group. Westfield had been responsible for dozens of special operations missions, any one of which could have been compromised. "Why should we trust you?" Mitchell asked. Hayes looked around the hangar at the faces watching her. Chief Sullivan, who'd protected her despite not knowing who she really was. The SEAL operators who'd risked themselves to defend strangers. The support crew who'd just witnessed their carefully ordered world turned upside down. Because 3 years ago, I made a choice to disappear rather than let political convenience override what was right. Tonight, I'm making the choice to reappear for the same reason. Commander Mitchell made a command decision. Chief Sullivan, I need secure communications to Pentagon Operations Priority Alpha. We're scrubbing tonight's mission and initiating a counterintelligence investigation. As the immediate crisis was handled, Hayes found herself in the unusual position of being officially visible again. The ghost existence was over. Too many people knew. Too much had been exposed. Captain Lawrence arrived at Coronado within 8 hours, having flown directly from Sandstone when he'd received word about the incident. Lieutenant Commander Hayes, he said when they finally spoke privately. It's time to come in from the cold. Hayes nodded slowly. What about the program, the shadow operations? There will always be a need for people who can do the impossible, but maybe it's time to do it officially again. And the consequences? Scorched earth, the unauthorized actions? Lawrence smiled. Commander, you just prevented a massacre and exposed a traitor. I think the Pentagon is prepared to officially forget about ancient history in exchange for current heroism. As dawn broke over Coronado Naval Base, Morgan Hayes stood in full uniform for the first time in 3 years. The Valkyrie patch was back on her sleeve, but this time it was accompanied by official rank insignia and a new assignment: Special Operations Aviation Support, with a mandate to prevent exactly the kind of intelligence compromises she'd been tracking. Chief Sullivan approached as she prepared to leave. Commander, will we see you again? Hayes smiled. Chief, this time when I show up, you'll know exactly who I am. The Special Operations mission was successfully rescheduled with clean intelligence. Captain Westfield was arrested for treason, and 30 SEALs who would have walked into an ambush instead returned home safely. But more importantly, Morgan Hayes was no longer a ghost. She was back where she belonged, serving officially, protecting people who protected others, and proving that sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who choose to disappear so others can shine. The Valkyrie had finally come home. 1 year later, Hangar 4 at Sandstone Naval Air Station was bustling with activity as dignitaries, military personnel, and media representatives gathered for an unprecedented ceremony. The event had been classified until the morning it occurred, but now the story of the Valkyrie was finally being told officially. Petty Officer First Class Rivera, now the senior mechanic on duty, supervised the final preparations with quiet pride. The CH-53 Super Stallion gleamed under the hangar lights, its surface meticulously maintained by a crew that had never forgotten the night their mysterious instructor had saved 23 Marines. Captain Lawrence, now promoted to Rear Admiral, stood at the podium reviewing his remarks one final time. After a year of classified hearings, congressional briefings, and Pentagon reviews, the decision had been made to reveal the truth about the Shadow Operations program and about the pilot who had made it work. Nervous, sir? Rivera asked as he approached. Lawrence smiled. A little. It's not every day you get to officially resurrect someone from the dead. At the back of the hangar, Chief Warrant Officer Sullivan from Coronado had arrived with several members of his crew. They'd requested permission to attend, having become part of the story themselves. Think she'll actually show up? Sullivan asked Senior Chief Martinez. She'll be here, Martinez replied confidently. The Valkyrie has never missed a mission. As if summoned by his words, a familiar figure appeared in the hangar doorway. But this time, Hayes wasn't wearing an unmarked flight suit or civilian instructor credentials. She walked in wearing the full dress uniform of a Navy commander with ribbon bars that told a story of exceptional service and a newly minted set of wings that reflected her official return to active flight status. The assembled crowd fell silent as she made her way toward the front of the hangar. For many of the younger personnel present, this was their first glimpse of the legendary pilot they'd heard whispered about in ready rooms and maintenance bays across the Navy. Admiral Wilson, who had flown in personally for the ceremony, stepped forward to greet her. Commander Hayes, he said formally, then smiled. It's good to have you back officially. Thank you, sir. It's good to be back. Rear Admiral Lawrence called the ceremony to order. Ladies and gentlemen, today we honor not just an exceptional pilot, but a model of what it means to serve with honor, even when that service cannot be recognized. He paused, looking directly at Hayes. 3 years ago, Lieutenant Commander Morgan Hayes was officially grounded during a classified mission. Today, we're here to correct the record and to recognize not just her continued service, but her extraordinary courage in ways that few could imagine and fewer still could accomplish. The formal citation was read, detailing Hayes's official achievements. Her exceptional performance during Scorched Earth, her successful deep cover operations maintaining aircraft readiness across multiple installations, her prevention of the Coronado betrayal, and her instrumental role in exposing the intelligence leak that had cost American lives. But for Hayes, the most meaningful moment came when Rear Admiral Lawrence called forward the ground crew from Hangar 4. "Commander Hayes," he said, "these men worked beside you when you were officially just an instructor. They've requested the honor of presenting you with something." Senior Chief Martinez stepped forward carrying a carefully folded flag. Not just any flag, but the one that had flown over Hangar 4 on the night of the Marine rescue mission. "Ma'am," Martinez said formally, "from all of us who've had the honor of serving with the Valkyrie." As Hayes accepted the flag, Rivera spoke up from the assembled crew. "Ma'am, we just want you to know, we never doubted you were exactly who you needed to be when you needed to be it. The emotion in the hangar was palpable. This wasn't just a military ceremony, it was a family reunion." Admiral Wilson took the podium for the final remarks. "Commander Hayes will be assuming command of the newly formed Special Operations Aviation Response Division. Her mission will be to ensure that when our people meet the impossible, someone is prepared to make it possible." After the formal ceremony, Hayes found herself surrounded by well-wishers and colleagues, but she noticed someone standing quietly by the CH-53. A young Marine she didn't recognize. She approached him. "Corporal Thompson," she read from his name tape. "Yes, ma'am. I just wanted to say thank you. I was one of the Marines you saved that night. I've got a daughter who was born 3 months ago, and she'll grow up with her father because of what you did." Hayes felt the weight of everything that had led to this moment. The choices, the sacrifices, the years of invisible service. "You saved yourself, Corporal. I just provided transportation." As the crowd began to disperse, Hayes walked over to the CH-53, running her hand along its familiar surface. Rivera joined her. "Strange to be back officially?" he asked. "In some ways," Hayes replied. "But you know what? The mission hasn't changed. Take care of the aircraft, take care of each other, and be ready when the impossible becomes necessary." "And now?" Rivera asked. Hayes smiled, looking around the hangar at the faces of people who had become more than colleagues. They'd become proof that service and sacrifice were recognized, even when they couldn't be acknowledged. "Now I get to do it all officially, with backup, with support, and with the best ground crews in the Navy." Chief Sullivan approached with a tablet. "Ma'am, your first assignment just came through. There's a situation developing overseas that might require someone with your particular skills." Hayes looked at the mission parameters, then at the assembled crew that would support her. For 3 years, she'd worked alone, invisible, and officially grounded. Now she had something she'd almost forgotten, a team. "Well, then," she said, her voice carrying the quiet confidence that had made her a legend. "Let's get to work." As the hangar lights dimmed and the crowd departed, the CH-53 Super Stallion stood ready once again. But this time, when the impossible became necessary, the Valkyrie wouldn't have to fly alone. Morgan Hayes was officially back, and the skies would never be the same. The story that had begun with laughter and dismissal had ended with recognition and respect. Sometimes heroes hide in plain sight, waiting for the moment when the world needs them most. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get to witness the moment when they step back into the light. The Valkyrie had finally come home to stay. 2 years after Commander Morgan Hayes had been officially reinstated, the newly formed Special Operations Aviation Response Division had become the most elite helicopter unit in the Navy. Known informally as the Valkyries, the division specialized in impossible missions, extractions, and insertions that conventional planning deemed unfeasible. Their reputation for miraculous successes had spread throughout the military community, inspiring a sense of security among special operations teams who knew that no matter how dire the situation, SWORD might find a way to reach them. At their headquarters on Naval Air Station North Island, Hayes stood before a holographic display showing a detailed map of a mountainous coastline in a contested region of the South China Sea. The mission brief scrolled beside the terrain, rendering a covert team of intelligence operatives was stranded on a remote island after their extraction plan had been compromised. Conventional rescue was impossible due to the heavy enemy presence in the area. "They've been maintaining radio silence for 36 hours, Lieutenant Commander Daniels," Hayes' executive officer explained. Last transmission indicated they were surrounded and running low on supplies. Hayes studied the terrain carefully. What's the weather window look like? Tropical storm moving in from the southwest. We've got maybe a 12-hour window before conditions become impossible even for us. The other pilots in the room exchanged glances. A tropical storm would ground any normal aviation unit, but impossible had become a relative term since Commander Hayes had taken charge. "Show me the defense grid," Hayes instructed. The hologram shifted to display red icons representing enemy radar installations, anti-aircraft batteries, and patrol routes. The density of the coverage was daunting. "There's no way through that net," Captain Reynolds, the newest addition to the team, observed. "Not even at wave-top height." Hayes didn't respond immediately. Her eyes traced patterns through the defenses, seeking the impossible path that experience had taught her always existed. The room fell silent, everyone watching the legendary pilot work through the problem in her mind. "There is a way," she said finally, "but it's not going to be conventional." Back at Sandstone Naval Air Station, now serving as SOARD's primary training facility, Rivera had been promoted to Chief Petty Officer and placed in charge of maintenance operations. Under his leadership, the facility had been transformed. The aircraft assigned to Hayes' unit had been modified with cutting-edge systems, many of them experimental, all of them pushing the boundaries of what military helicopters could achieve. Senior Chief Martinez, now approaching retirement, watched with pride as Rivera led a team of mechanics through a complex maintenance procedure on a modified MH-60 Seahawk. The aircraft had been stripped of unnecessary weight and equipped with enhanced stealth features, extended fuel capacity, and advanced electronic warfare systems. "Think it'll be enough?" Martinez asked as Rivera closed an access panel. "For a normal pilot? No." Rivera replied honestly. "For Commander Hayes? It's got a chance." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a transport aircraft on the runway. As they watched, a familiar figure descended from the plane, Admiral Lawrence, now serving as the Director of Naval Special Programs. His presence at Sandstone meant only one thing, a mission that pushed even Hayes' extraordinary capabilities. "Chief Rivera," Lawrence called out as he approached. "I need your team to prep 2 birds for immediate deployment. Full combat load, extended range configuration." "Yes, sir. May I ask where they're headed?" Lawrence's expression was grim. "The South China Sea. Commander Hayes is planning something that's going to require the absolute best from these aircraft." As Rivera mobilized his team, Lawrence pulled Martinez aside. "How are the new modifications performing?" "The stealth coating is working better than expected, sir. Radar cross-section is reduced by nearly 85%. The new rotor design has cut the acoustic signature significantly as well. But the real game-changer is the experimental optical camouflage system." Lawrence raised an eyebrow. "It's operational?" Martinez nodded. "We've had it running in tests for 3 weeks. Not perfect, but in low-light conditions, at a distance, it's remarkably effective. Makes the aircraft almost invisible to the naked eye." "And Hayes knows how to use it?" "Sir, she's been flying with the prototype for months. Wrote half the operating procedures herself." Lawrence nodded thoughtfully. "She's going to need every advantage." "This mission?" He paused. "Well, let's just say it's beyond impossible, even by her standards." At North Island, Hayes had assembled her flight team, 4 pilots, each selected personally for their exceptional skills and unorthodox thinking. The mission planning room had transformed into a hive of focused activity as they worked through the details of what Hayes had begun calling Operation Phantom Tide. "The approach will use the storm front as cover," she explained, gesturing to the weather patterns displayed on the hologram. "We'll come in from the southeast, riding the leading edge of the storm. Their radar will be degraded by the weather, and they'll be expecting any rescue attempt to avoid the storm, not use it." Lieutenant Santiago, the team's weather specialist, looked concerned. "That's putting us dangerously close to the worst turbulence, Commander. Even with your skills, that's asking a lot of the aircraft." "I'm not flying into the heart of the storm, just skimming its edge," Hayes clarified. It's a calculated risk, but it gives us the best chance of insertion without detection. And the extraction? Captain Reynolds asked. Once we have the team, we'll have lost the element of surprise. Hayes's expression was determined. That's where things get interesting. She touched a control panel, and the hologram shifted to display a detailed flight path that seemed to defy conventional aviation wisdom. Instead of retreating back through the storm, the extraction route led directly over a mountainous island, through a narrow pass, then out to sea via a route that would take them within dangerous proximity of the main enemy naval base. You want to fly directly over their heads? Daniels asked incredulously. It's the last thing they'll expect, Hayes replied. Every moment they spend looking for us over open water is time we can use to slip past them over land. The optical camouflage system will help mask our visual signature, and the mountains will disrupt their radar coverage just enough to create blind spots. The room fell silent as the pilots studied the plan. It was audacious, borderline reckless, and yet, as they traced through the route and timing, unmistakably brilliant. One question, Commander, Reynolds said finally. Who's flying lead on this? Hayes met his gaze steadily. I am. This declaration was met with both relief and concern. Hayes's skills were legendary, but the personal risk she was taking by leading such a dangerous mission reflected the seriousness of the situation. 6 hours later, at Sandstone, Chief Rivera was performing final checks on the 2 heavily modified Seahawks that would carry Hayes and her team into danger. Each aircraft had been pushed far beyond its original design specifications, incorporating technologies that wouldn't be standard for years to come. Chief, I need a moment, a voice called from behind him. Rivera turned to find Corporal Thompson, the same Marine who had thanked Hayes at her reinstatement ceremony 2 years earlier. Now wearing the insignia of a Force Recon Marine, Thompson had clearly moved up in the world. What can I do for you, Corporal? I heard Commander Hayes is leading a mission to extract some stranded operatives. Rivera's expression remained neutral. I couldn't comment on ongoing operations. Thompson nodded, understanding. Of course not. But if such a mission were happening, I'd want to give her this. He handed Rivera a small object, a hand-crafted medallion bearing the Marine Corps emblem on one side and the Valkyrie symbol on the other. What's this? Rivera asked, turning it over in his hand. The 23 of us who she saved that night, we all carry one. Reminder that impossible just means you haven't found the right pilot yet. Thompson's expression was earnest. Could you make sure it finds its way to her? For luck? Rivera pocketed the medallion with a nod. I'll make sure it gets where it needs to go. As darkness fell, the 2 modified Seahawks were loaded onto a C-17 transport aircraft for deployment to a forward operating base closer to the mission area. Rivera supervised the loading process personally, ensuring every detail was perfect. Just before the aircraft were secured, he slipped into the lead helicopter's cockpit and placed the medallion on the pilot's seat with a handwritten note, "From those you saved before to help save those waiting now." Meanwhile, at the Pentagon, Admiral Wilson sat in a secure communications room, monitoring the preparations for Operation Phantom Tide. On the screens before him, satellite imagery showed the tropical storm advancing toward the target area, exactly as Hayes had predicted. Any update on the stranded team? He asked the intelligence officer manning the communications station. Still dark, sir. No transmissions for nearly 40 hours now. Wilson nodded grimly. 3 years ago, he had been part of the Shadow program that kept Hayes operating in secret. Now he was openly supporting missions that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. But the stakes remained just as high. What's the latest assessment of enemy activity in the region? The intelligence officer brought up a new display. Increased naval patrols, sir. They know something's up. 2 additional destroyers have moved into the area, and we're tracking increased aerial surveillance. They're expecting a conventional rescue attempt, Wilson observed. Yes, sir. All their preparations suggest they're anticipating a larger force coming from our carrier group. Wilson allowed himself a small smile. They don't know Morgan Hayes. 12 hours later, at a small forward operating base on the edge of international waters, Hayes and her team made final preparations for launch. The tropical storm had intensified slightly, but was still tracking as predicted. Darkness would fall in 3 hours, giving them the cover of night for the most dangerous phases of the mission. Hayes found the medallion during her pre-flight check, reading the note with a thoughtful expression before slipping it into her flight suit pocket. Some pilots were superstitious about carrying tokens into combat. Hayes wasn't superstitious, but she understood the power of connection, the reminder that her actions rippled outward, touching lives in ways she might never fully comprehend. As the pilots gathered for a final briefing, Hayes noticed Captain Reynolds seemed tense, more so than the others. "Something on your mind, Captain?" she asked when they had a moment alone. Reynolds hesitated before answering. "Permission to speak freely, Commander?" "Always. The extraction route, flying directly over their heads. It's inspired, but if anything goes wrong, if they spot us—" "They won't have time to react," Hayes assured him. "That's the beauty of doing the unexpected. By the time they realize what's happening, we'll be gone." Reynolds nodded, but didn't seem entirely convinced. "It's just, I have a 3-month-old daughter at home. First time deploying since she was born." Hayes's expression softened. "Family changes how we calculate risk. Makes us more careful in some ways, more determined in others." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "But sometimes, the safest path home is straight through the fire. Trust the plan, Captain. Trust your training. And if all else fails, trust that I've gotten people home from worse situations than this." The confidence in her voice seemed to steady him. "Thank you, Commander. Now get ready. We launch in 90 minutes." As twilight descended, the 2 Seahawks lifted off from the forward base, their modified engines producing significantly less noise than standard models. Hayes led in the first aircraft, with Reynolds piloting the second. Each carried a team of special operators trained for high-risk extraction missions. The initial phase of the flight was relatively straightforward, maintaining low altitude over open water, using the growing darkness as cover. But as they approached the storm front, conditions deteriorated rapidly. Turbulence buffeted the aircraft, requiring constant adjustments to maintain course and altitude. "Storm intensity increasing," Santiago reported over the secure comm channel. "Wind shear at the boundary is stronger than predicted. Adjust approach vector 5 degrees south," Hayes instructed. "We'll ride the outer edge rather than cut directly through." The helicopters banked slightly, finding a marginally calmer path through the churning air. Rain lashed against the windshields, reducing visibility, but Hayes flew with the confidence of someone who could sense the aircraft's position in space through feel alone. "Approaching radar coverage," Daniels announced, monitoring the electronic warfare systems. "First detection grid in 30 seconds. Activate countermeasures," Hayes ordered. Electronic signature at minimum. The advanced systems integrated into the Seahawks began their work, absorbing radar signals rather than reflecting them, creating digital noise that disguised their true position, and projecting false returns that would appear as storm interference to enemy operators. "Radar locked. They're not seeing us," Daniels confirmed after a tense minute. "Storm is masking our approach exactly as planned." Hayes allowed herself a brief smile. The most dangerous part of the mission still lay ahead, but they had successfully penetrated the outer defensive perimeter, a feat that conventional wisdom had deemed impossible. As they approached the island where the intelligence team was stranded, Hayes activated the optical camouflage system. The helicopter's exterior began to shimmer slightly, as thousands of tiny cameras and projectors worked in concert, displaying images of the sky and clouds on the opposite side of the aircraft. From a distance, in the fading light, the effect was remarkable. The Seahawk seemed to partially disappear, its outline blurring into the background. "Visual camouflage active and functioning within parameters," Hayes reported. "Reynolds, maintain formation distance. The system works best when we're not silhouetted against each other." "Understood, Commander. Matching your speed and separation." They descended toward a small clearing on the island's eastern side, the location where intelligence suggested the stranded team would be hiding. No lights or signals were visible from the ground. Either the team was maintaining complete blackout conditions, or they had been captured. "No visual confirmation of friendlies," Santiago observed tensely. "They're there," Hayes replied with certainty. "Prepare for rapid extraction." 60 seconds on the ground. Not a second more. The Seahawks hovered momentarily, then descended into the clearing, rotors whipping the surrounding vegetation into a frenzy. As soon as they touched down, special operators poured from both aircraft, moving with practiced efficiency toward the tree line. Hayes kept the engines running, eyes scanning the perimeter for any sign of enemy forces. The minutes seemed to stretch endlessly as she waited for the extraction team to return. "Contact," came the sudden report over the comm. "We have the package. 5 individuals, 2 requiring medical assistance. Returning to extract point now." True to their training, the operators emerged from the foliage less than a minute later. Supporting several figures in civilian clothing, they loaded quickly into the helicopters, securing the injured for transport. "All personnel aboard," Reynolds confirmed. "Ready for departure. Execute extraction plan," Hayes ordered, lifting her Seahawk into the darkening sky with Reynolds following close behind. Rather than retreating the way they had come, Hayes led the formation directly toward the mountainous spine of the island, flying straight toward the heart of enemy territory. "Enemy radar is active," Daniels reported. "They've detected something, but readings are confused. They're focusing their search over the water to the east." "As expected," Hayes replied. "They're looking where conventional extraction would go. Maintain course and speed. Optical camouflage at maximum." The helicopters skimmed over the rugged terrain, following the contours of valleys and ridgelines to minimize their radar profile. The moonlight breaking through clouds created challenging conditions for the optical camouflage system, occasionally revealing glimpses of the aircraft before the technology could adjust. As they approached the narrow mountain pass that was the keystone of Hayes' plan, an urgent alert sounded in the cockpit. "Enemy aircraft launching from the western base," Santiago reported. 2 fighters on an intercept course. "They're still guessing," Hayes assessed calmly. "Those fighters are heading east to search over open water. We'll be over their naval base before they realize their mistake." The Seahawks threaded through the mountain pass with mere feet of clearance on either side, emerging over a bay where enemy vessels were clearly visible below. The audacity of flying directly over the enemy's strongest position was its own form of camouflage. No one was looking up, because no one expected an American helicopter to be there. "Naval base passing beneath us," Reynolds reported, his voice tight with tension. "No reaction yet." "Keep it steady," Hayes instructed. "We're almost through." For 3 nerve-wracking minutes they continued on course, passing directly over enemy territory, protected by darkness, technology, and the sheer unexpectedness of their route. Then, as they cleared the far side of the bay, Daniels gave the update they'd been waiting for. "We're beyond their inner radar perimeter, outer defensive grid in 2 minutes. Hayes allowed herself to breathe more easily, though she maintained complete focus on flying. "Status of the extracted personnel? 2 with moderate injuries, stable for transport. 3 unharmed but exhausted. They've been evading capture for nearly 3 days." "Tell them they're going home," Hayes said simply. When they finally cleared the last radar perimeter and reached international waters, the tension in both helicopters visibly eased. The mission had succeeded against overwhelming odds, extracting valuable intelligence operatives from a situation that had been deemed unsurvivable. As they approached the forward operating base, Hayes reached into her pocket and touched the medallion given to her by the Marines she had saved years earlier. The circle was complete. Lives she had saved had contributed, even in a small way, to her saving more lives tonight. Upon landing, medical teams rushed forward to attend to the injured intelligence operatives. Hayes completed her shutdown procedures methodically before joining Reynolds on the tarmac. "You were right," he admitted, watching the rescued team being cared for. "Sometimes the safest way home is straight through the fire." Hayes nodded. "Fear makes us predictable. Overcome that. And suddenly, the impossible becomes an option." News of the successful extraction spread quickly through secure channels. At the Pentagon, Admiral Wilson received the mission complete notification with a satisfied nod. At Sandstone, Chief Rivera got word through his own channels and shared a knowing look with Senior Chief Martinez. Throughout the naval aviation community, the legend of Commander Hayes and her Valkyries grew stronger. 3 days later, back at North Island, Hayes sat alone in her office reviewing the mission reports. Every detail had been documented, every lesson learned, every success and near miss cataloged for future reference. This was how the impossible became routine, through meticulous attention to what worked and why. A knock at her door interrupted her concentration. "Enter," she called. Admiral Lawrence stepped into the office, carrying a small wooden box. "Commander, I thought you should see this personally." He placed the box on her desk and opened it, revealing a Navy Cross, one of the highest decorations awarded for extraordinary heroism. Hayes looked at it without reaching to touch it. "Sir, with respect, I don't need—" "It's not for you," Lawrence interrupted with a slight smile. "It's for Captain William Thornton, the lead intelligence operative you extracted." Turns out he had obtained information critical to national security. Information that would have been lost if you hadn't found a way to reach him. Hayes absorbed this news silently. "You may have noticed I said found a way rather than done the impossible," Lawrence continued. "That's because you've fundamentally changed how we define what's possible, Hayes. 3 years ago, that mission would never have been attempted. We would have written those people off as lost." "Anyone could have done it with the right aircraft and team," Hayes demurred. Lawrence shook his head. "No. The technology helped, certainly. The team was exceptional, without question. But it was your vision, your ability to see the path that no one else could see, that made the difference." He closed the box containing the medal. "Thornton asked me to thank you personally. Said he knew he was going to die on that island until he heard your helicopter coming in. Said it was like the sound of the Valkyrie herself coming to carry warriors home." Hayes allowed herself a small smile at that. "Just doing my job, sir." "No, Hayes," Lawrence said firmly. "You're doing far more than your job. You're showing an entire generation of pilots and operators what courage really means. Not fearlessness. We both know you feel fear like anyone else, but the willingness to fly straight through that fear toward what matters most." After Lawrence left, Hayes remained at her desk, contemplating his words. From her window, she could see the hangar where her modified Seahawks waited for the next impossible mission. Beyond that, the ocean stretched to the horizon, a reminder of the vast world where others might be stranded, waiting for rescue. 3 years ago, she had been grounded, her wings clipped by politics and rules that couldn't accommodate the necessary exceptions that sometimes arose in a complex world. Now she commanded the most elite helicopter unit in the Navy, flying missions that redefined what was possible. The journey from grounded pilot to legendary commander hadn't been easy. It had required sacrifice, patience, and a willingness to work in the shadows when necessary. But Hayes had never lost sight of what mattered most, bringing people home. She reached into her pocket and withdrew the medallion given to her before the mission. The Marine Corps emblem on one side, the Valkyrie symbol on the other. A reminder that the missions she flew weren't about regulations or politics or even personal vindication. They were about the sacred trust between those who serve, the promise that no one would be left behind if there was any way at all, to bring them home. Commander Morgan Hayes, once banned from flying, had found her wings again. And in doing so, she had given wings to an entire generation of aviators who would learn from her example that impossible was just another word for hasn't been done yet. The Valkyrie would fly again tomorrow, and the day after, and for as long as there were those who needed to be carried home through storm and fire and darkness. Not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. Not because it was safe, but because it was right. And that, in the end, was what truly defined a hero. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.